I'm building a 2-trailer tiny house and I've just finished varnishing the interior, so it's time for a build update. So with the interior all lined, with the exception of the bathroom wall, which I'll have to come back to later, it was time to clear coat everything. Now I thought this was going to be a pretty boring part of the build because it's just putting clear on, but it's actually really transformed the interior of the house. It's made all the plywood look nice and smooth and consistent, and the product I've used has sort of created this gentle sheen across the plywood, which looks really nice, and it started to really make the interior feel final, which I'm pretty excited about. Now the product that I've gone with is actually a floor finish. It's CPF Floor by Cabot, and I love this stuff because it goes on really well and it's super durable. I use this in the micro tiny house, and I've been abusing that for the last few years, and I tell you what, it's stood up really well. Now for the interior, I didn't want to make a feature of the plywood. I just wanted a subtle finish across the plywood that it was nice and durable. So I've gone with a matte finish that's sort of a bit closer to a low sheen, but it creates this really nice sheen and it catches the light really nicely. Now I've decided to spray it on because first of all, it helps me sort of be able to get through the house and knock it out really quick and get varnish in all these shadow lines, but also there's nothing in here. The floor was already covered and all I needed to do was tape up the windows so I could just get in here and make one hell of a mess. And it most certainly did. But also the spray gives a nice consistent finish. So when you look across the walls now and it catches the light, it's nice and smooth and you don't see any stippling from a roller or any brush marks from a brush. So I really like how it came out. Anyway, let's go check out how I did it. So the first step was to get in and mask everything up. Now I tell you what, if you're going to be spraying, you want to make sure absolutely everything that you don't want varnish on is covered up. Now I already had the floors covered, but I went around all of the edges and made sure that the covers went all the way up to the walls, even underneath the plywood, and then I had to mask the windows. Now you'll notice with the windows, I've actually used brown paper around the edges and then plastic on the inside. Now the plastic is just simple and easy to mask up the windows, and it's pre-taped, which makes it very quick, but also I wanted the plastic so I could allow light into here. If I just used brown paper on everything, it would just really darken inside the house and I wouldn't be able to see anything. And when you're putting on clear varnish, you can't actually see a color difference, so you really need that light to be able to see how the varnish is going on. But the problem with plastic is when you spray varnish over the top of that, the varnish will set on the plastic. Once it's dry, if you move that plastic, it will then flake off of the plastic and you get varnish going everywhere. So what I did was around the edge of all of my windows or anything I was taping up, I used brown paper because brown paper will actually absorb the varnish, and when you then move that paper, it doesn't flake off. So I used brown paper around the edges where my gun was going to be coming up to the edge of the window and stopping, and I was going to get a burst of varnish onto it, but also that was the part that was most likely to be moved by the air of the gun. So while the plastic still moved a little bit, it was less affected by the air of the gun, and I got less flakes of sort of dry varnish in the air as I was clear coating, and that worked really well because I didn't end up with any dry varnish in my final finish. With everything taped up, it was time to go through and sand everything. Now I pre-sanded all of the sheets before I put them on the walls, but through the process of lining the house, they'd get marked and some would they were on there for a while, the grain would start to lift, so it was important to do a final sand before I clear coat it because the surface that was there would be what I'm stuck with once the varnish goes on. This is a tedious process. It just meant running a sander over every last square centimeter of the house, just working my way through, and it's just an unpleasant back-breaking process, particularly doing the ceilings and try and hold that damn thing over your head. So I just had to get in, run the sander through it and get that done. I then had to come through and clean out all the dust because once I start spraying, any dust that's laying down, the spray gun's going to whip that dust up, and I don't want that to end up in the finish. So I had to go through, vacuum all the floor, make sure I got as much dust as I could out of the house. With everything sanded, it was time to start laying on the varnish. I was using an electric air-fed gun, which was great, but it was designed for doing wall paint. And it probably meant the jet size is a little bit too big, and that meant it pumped out a lot of varnish. Now, this was great when I was doing the first coat because the plywood just really sucked that up, but I paid for it later when I was doing the later coats. And in the first coat, I also got a bit ambitious where I was really trying to push clear coat up into the shadow lines in the corners, and I ended up with a few runs on the walls that I had to brush out and then come back and sand before I did the next coat. But I quickly got the knack of it, and it was good because I could lay in a lot of varnish in that and fill the pores of the plywood in that first coat. Now I started at the highest point, which was the ceilings, and then worked my way down. There's a couple reasons for that. First of all, I could lay the varnish onto the roof, and then when I was doing the walls, any overspray that was going up onto the roof and it was sort of overloading the paint a little bit wasn't going to run because it was a horizontal surface. But also because it creates a lot of overspray, as I'm working my way over the walls, I'm not getting drift going down onto panels that I've already done because I'm working my way down. Now I tell you what, if you're spraying, you really want PPE. A set of coveralls are an absolute must because there's so much varnish in the air, but also a respirator. It got really, really fumey in this small space, particularly because the gun is atomizing the varnish, which just puts a lot of fumes, a lot of varnish into the air, and you don't want to be breathing that. In fact, at the end of the day, when I had to come back, I was outside cleaning up and I had to come back in and grab something, and I came in without the respirator and almost blew my head off. So I didn't make that mistake twice, and it probably took a good, I don't know, maybe 10 hours for the house to really evacuate all the fumes. So if you are spray painting, be careful of that because it's not good stuff to be breathing in. It's certainly probably going to fry you noodle if you do. So with the first coat done, I then had to go back and sand it, my favorite activity. Now that's because when you put the first load of clear coat on, it makes all of the grain of the plywood stand up and you get this really rough finish. So now that the finish is quite inert, you can run the sander over it, knock down that grain and create a nice smooth finish. So same again, I just had to work my way through the house, sanding every last centimetre of the house. And I tell you what, I was just sick of holding that sander up on the ceiling by the end of it. But got it done, and I got nice smooth walls, which created a great surface for the next coat. And finally, the last coat. Now, it sort of varied 2 to 3 coats in different parts of the house. The bathroom, I did 3 coats to make sure that that was nice and moisture resistant. And then some of the high traffic areas, I did an extra coat so that there's a little bit more build up just to make sure the wall's going to be a bit more durable. Now this is where the gun became a challenge because it was pumping out a lot of varnish, and with the ply already having a coat on it, the varnish wouldn't absorb and it would build up really quickly. So I had to move the gun pretty quick to get a nice even film on there and avoid building up and getting runs. And I kind of had to be careful in the corners that I didn't build up too much and get overspray on the adjacent walls. But I got the hang of it, moved the house really quick and got it coated. So once it was done, I went back through the house and just checked out all the panels to make sure there weren't any inconsistencies or I'd created runs. So I had to touch up a couple, and I had to redo the ceiling in the main trailer because the light really shines across it from that big window, and I had a couple little hazy patches. So I redid that to make sure it was nice and smooth and consistent, and then the house was done. So with the exception of the wall that has to be built in between the bathroom and the bedroom here and sort of face into the main trailer, that's all my interior lining done, which is cool. Like the windows, the lining, it's finished. This is sort of a final part of the house. So I can sort of tick and say that part of the house is done, which I'm pretty excited about, but there's still heaps of work to do. The next steps is to move on to the shower, and you may have noticed the waterproofing is already well underway with that. So I've still got a bit to do there, then I can start lining that, and hopefully I can do a video on the shower pretty soon. You guys know the drill. Don't hate, educate. Comment down below if you see something in this video can be improved, or if you've got any questions about how I've varnished the walls or spraying it. If you're one of those crazy people still watching, make sure you show those 2 hands in the comments. In the meantime, go build cool stuff. I'll see you again soon.